If we're being honest, that type of performance was only just around the corner. Arsenal's Premier League title hopes dealt a major blow after defeat at the hands of West Ham United. What exactly went wrong? We'll discuss some individual performances and we'll try and make sense of where Arsenal are at currently on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Don't go anywhere. Hey everybody, how are we? Happy Sunday and welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. If you're with us live, we're streaming a little bit earlier than normal today for a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to get it out of the way. I want to deal with what we saw yesterday nice and early so that it doesn't sort of cloud over my Sunday. Well, it will in some ways, but basically I just want to draw a line under it and move on. I want to enjoy the rest of my weekend if possible. And so I want to get this sort of mini rant / podcast out of the way. I think it's important that you do that early in the day so that you can move on. They always say, don't they, that you should never go to bed angry. So doing this in the morning feels like the right thing to do. Also, I promised my kids I would take them out and I'm going to do that. But I planned my day to kind of start and all sort of work a little bit earlier so that I could take them out before I would have to sort of rush home to come back and watch the Manchester City and Liverpool game because I was really, really looking forward to sitting down and watching that. I'll probably still watch it. We'll watch it, I beg your pardon, because I've sort of made my plans accordingly to make sure that I'm available for it. But at the same time, am I going to be watching it with the same enthusiasm and the same interest as I would have done had Arsenal beaten West Ham United yesterday? Probably not. And that's as a consequence of what we saw yesterday in terms of the outcome. But for me, it's not even the outcome that's the most frustrating thing. It's the performance. And a lot of the time, you know, we see shock results in football. And this was seen as a shock by the bookmakers going into the game. But I actually think when you started to watch the match unfold, 15, 20 minutes in, you could kind of see what was coming. You could see what Arsenal were missing. The question was, would West Ham generate that chance that they needed to win the game? They managed to do that. And so they got all 3 points rather than one. But from an Arsenal perspective, we were just miles off it. Mikel Arteta was clear on that after the game as well. There were no excuses. He refused to kind of go down the route of talking about a lack of signings, etc., etc. And whilst a lot of our issues at the moment can be sort of tracked back to that, because, of course, we all agreed, didn't we, that we needed more in attack, that we needed another option, especially in the face of two major injuries to Bukayo Saka and Gabby Jesus. Havertz and Martinelli went down after that. You can't really account for that, but what you can account for is being left incredibly short. And that's where, we've left ourselves. We left ourselves in a position where we were literally down to 3 attackers, one of which didn't even get in the team yesterday and wasn't even the go-to guy off of the substitutes bench when Arsenal needed a goal. So, yeah, we left ourselves in a really vulnerable position and we've paid the price for that, I feel. And although I would love to sit here and sort of go back to the January window again, I promised I wasn't going to do that. So we're not going to do that today. We're going to focus on the actual performance that we saw and what we've seen from what we have, because it's all good moaning about what you don't have. Sometimes you have to look at what you have and pin the responsibility there. And despite Arsenal having key players missing, despite Arsenal fielding a makeshift attack, despite Arsenal having to play Mikel Merino up front, etc., this team is much better, even without those players, than what we saw yesterday. And that's what makes yesterday's performance so frustrating. It's inexcusable. And we're going to try and make sense of it on this episode of the pod. I don't even know where to go. Like, normally I have my bullet points written out and, I sort of work my way through those and I add my little bits and pieces here and there as we go, as whatever comes to my head in the moment. And, we kind of have at least some sort of structure to a podcast. I really don't know where to go with this one today because I've got so many frustrations and there's a feeling of sadness as well. Like, I know a lot of people tend to get angry when Arsenal drop points or don't perform. And that anger, I think, comes across on social media, on videos, on podcasts, etc., etc. For me, more often than it being anger, it is sadness. And the reason it's sadness is because I really love this team. I really love what Mikel Arteta has done, generally speaking. I really love the direction in which Arsenal have gone when you kind of zoom out. But that means that when you get to these situations where it's clear that you've fallen short, and for me now the title race is over, and if Liverpool are to beat Manchester City today, you might as well give them the trophy and crown them champions, because, you know, there's no way that we're turning this around. And I've maintained for a little while that it's not that I think Liverpool are infallible. It's not that I think that Liverpool are perfect. It's more to do with the fact that I didn't believe that Arsenal, with all their injury problems and the lack of options available to Mikel Arteta, you know, whether that's out of choice or not in terms of what we could or couldn't have done in the January window, that's up for debate. We'll get into that another day. But it's a sadness because we've worked so hard to get this team to a place where it's competitive again. And in the year that it was supposed to be our year, okay, injuries have rocked us and hit us, but we've gone out with a whimper, because in my opinion, we are out of the title race right now. We are out of the FA Cup. We are out of the League Cup. And it's just about the Champions League now. And of course, consolidating our position in the Premier League, which I think is very, very important as well. But in terms of silverware and trophies, which is ultimately what we all believed was coming this season, you know, we've ended up in a situation where we've got our eggs in one basket, and it's probably the most difficult basket of them all, because if we do progress past PSV, and if we continue to play the way we are, by the way, that's not a given, that's for sure, then we face probably Real Madrid. In fact, I would back Atletico Madrid to beat us right now as well. And so, yeah, we're in a really horrible place. We're in a really dark place, I think, in terms of how everything's unfolded. And I think the frustration for people will be that we had opportunities to try and mitigate the risk of this disaster that we're now seeing unfold in front of us. Whereas, you know, if you go back to previous seasons when we lost key players like 5, 6, 7 weeks from the end of the season, there was nothing you could do about that. And you'd look at it and you go, okay, the squad's not strong enough, but we've been really, really unlucky with the injuries. We all knew this was coming. And as a consequence of that, we all knew that these turgid performances were coming as well. And we got away with it last weekend at Leicester. Let's have it right. We were really, really poor for 80 minutes. We found a way of breaking them down eventually. And you know what? Going back to that Leicester game, just very, very quickly, when I look back on that game and I sort of watched the highlights again the other day, I really do feel like, you know, that moment where Leicester broke down the left-hand side and they put the cross into the box and Miles Lewis-Skelly was on hand to just kind of turn it round the corner and make sure that they didn't have a tap in at the far post. That felt like a moment in the game where Leicester really started to believe that they could go on and win it. You know, they started to sense that Arsenal weren't at it. They started to get a belief and develop a belief that actually they could go on and take all 3 points. And that led to them coming at us a little bit more aggressively. And in doing that, they left spaces and we were able to exploit them, because as I've been saying all week, the introduction of Mikel Merino up front in that particular game, it worked because the circumstances allowed it to work. It worked because the circumstances were perfect for it. And the context of that game at the time allowed those changes to really make a difference. Now, had Leicester continued to sit back, I don't think Mikel Merino is anywhere near as effective as he was on the day. And so my question all week was, do we go with Merino from the start, or is that something that we do later in the game? Is that our kind of game-changing card? Is that a card that we play later on in the day? And listen, I don't want to sit here and go big on Mikel Arteta about that, because when I named my lineup on Friday's preview show, I put Mikel Merino up front. I think with hindsight, we can say it was probably wrong. I think that's fair to say. But by that same token, how convinced is anybody that Raheem Sterling would have made a difference? Probably not very convinced, given his performances in an Arsenal shirt so far. So, look, it's easy to sit here and say the team was wrong, etc., etc. I'm not, as I say, I'm not going to go too big on that because it's the team I would have picked. But it didn't work yesterday. And we'll come on to the Raheem Sterling thing in a bit, because I feel like, all right, him not starting, it wasn't a massive surprise. It wasn't a massive issue, because everybody agreed that his performance at Leicester wasn't very good. And so you can't blame a manager for wanting to go with what he watched work and wanting to veer away from what he clearly felt wasn't working. You can't blame him for that. But at the same time, to then overlook Raheem Sterling when you need a goal and start bringing on a bunch of fullbacks before him, that to me was a little bit strange. And we're going to get into all of that and more on this episode of the pod. Make sure, guys, if you haven't done so already, you leave a like on the video. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review. All of that stuff really, really does help. And please, as well, leave us a review on your favorite podcast platforms as well. All of that stuff really, really does help. Let me say a few hellos, and then we'll dive into the thick of yesterday's game. Big hello to Chris, who says, can't believe I'm finally catching a live stream. Normally listen on Spotify while I'm at work. Tough one to take. It was indeed. Jid says, the lack of creativity yesterday was insane. Out of the 4 league games we failed to score in this season, this was the worst. It was really, really bad, wasn't it? Mario says, morning, Harry, mate. Very poor performance. We look totally out of sorts. I don't think anyone in the team played good. Maybe Partey and Nwaneri. You can't put that on a 17-year-old. Absolutely. Spot on with that. Obadiah says, I remember talking to my brother yesterday morning. I told him I didn't want Merino to start because if it doesn't work out, then we can't really change anything. Yeah, and look, that is fair, okay? And although when I picked my team, I repeatedly said, look, I would play Merino up front because I think Sterling was so bad at Leicester that there is literally zero justification for him starting again. But at the same time, I did, and if you go back to Friday's pod, you'll hear it. I did repeatedly question whether it's something that would work from the start. And so, look, Mikel Arteta had to roll the dice on that. He chose to go that way. It didn't work out on the day, but that's not what I'm going to be majorly critical of as we work our way through today's podcast. So let's have a quick look then at the lineup that we started with. I'll just share my screen for those of you that are with us live on YouTube now. Bear with me a second. Let me just select the right tab. There we go. Is that the one I want? Here we go. There you are. That's the one I want. Right. So Raya in goal, Timber at right back, Saliba, Gabriel, and Calafiori came into the side. No issue with me really with Calafiori coming into the side. I'd have picked him as well. I said it again in my lineup on Friday when we were building up to the game. I never felt that it was because Miles Lewis-Skelly didn't deserve to start. That was never kind of my point around Riccardo Calafiori coming back into the team. For me, it was more a case of, well, we've got Forest away in midweek, and, you know, it might be a good opportunity to get Calafiori in the side on Saturday, where we're probably going to need to try and break down a team that are a little bit more defensive-minded. I mean, Forest are quite a defensive-minded team as well, but they'll be at home, and the onus will be on them a little bit to come out and attack us where possible. Against West Ham, I felt we were going to face a low block. We faced a mid-block at various points in the game as well, but we couldn't deal with that either. And I just thought Calafiori's forward thinking might be better suited to this game, but it was always with the view to Miles Lewis-Skelly coming back into the side on Wednesday night. Midfield, Partey, Rice, Ødegaard. It's the midfield I would have picked. Nwaneri on the right. Trossard went back out onto the left, and Mikel Merino started through the middle. If we have a look at some of the match statistics, some of the overall match statistics, 68% of the possession, but our expected goals was 1.22. West Ham's was 1.07. So not a huge difference. In fact, it's a negligible difference between the two teams and their XG on the day, yet we dominated possession. And again, it goes back to what I've said so many times over the course of this season. Possession is great because you're less likely to concede, I suppose, when you don't have the ball. And you're certainly more likely to score when you do have it. But at the end of the day, it doesn't tell the full story. And for so long, we've sort of heard people coming out and saying, oh, well, you know, Arsenal dominated the game but didn't get what they deserved. Domination in terms of possession is one thing, but dominating the game in terms of creating clear-cut chances and giving yourself the best chance of winning it, we don't do that enough. We had one big chance in the game. One. They had one. Yet they had 32% of the possession. We had 68%. Mikel Arteta was very quick to point out in his post-match interviews and press conferences that we had 20 shots at goal. Are we supposed to celebrate that? Because when you look at the reality of it, of those 20 shots, only 2 were on target. West Ham managed 5 shots in total, 2 of which were also on target. So what does that say? Well, that says that we're not efficient enough in the final third. And we knew that efficiency was going to be a problem with the players that we have absent. But this thing of like throwing out the number of shots we have as some kind of defense mechanism or some kind of justification for, what we did in terms of the overall performance, I can't take it, because those shots mean nothing. 10 of those 20 shots were blocked pretty much at source. 10 of them. So we didn't work the goalkeeper. We didn't get anywhere near goal. We didn't cause Areola any problems. I can think of Alphonse Areola making one save in the second half down to his right, and it was a pretty straightforward save with his leg, I think. We're not anywhere near efficient enough. And people, again, will point back to the problems that we have in attack and with the players that we've got missing. And that is right to a degree. And while I've got sympathy for where we are, etc., it's... You've still got to expect and demand more from this team, because there's enough quality within our ranks to perform to a much higher standard, a much higher level than this. We're going to talk about the goal that we conceded. And then when we finish with that, we're going to go into some individual performances, because I think there's a fair few that we need to get into and really dissect on this episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast. Remember, if you're watching us on YouTube, please leave a like on the video. If you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review as well. All of that brilliant stuff really, really does help. Right. Shall we move on then to the goal that we conceded, and the goal that ultimately won West Ham United the match? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring up the goal. I can't show it to you guys, obviously, for copyright reasons, for those of you with us on YouTube, but I will just bring it up so that I can kind of talk through it as I see it play out, because I think this is a really, really poor goal to concede. And my issue with the goal that we conceded is we got a warning sign before, didn't we? There was a warning sign about Wan-Bissaka kind of breaking down that right-hand side. Jarrod Bowen, if you remember, cut the ball back. Received the cut back from Wan-Bissaka that he sort of ended up firing wide. And it was a warning sign of what West Ham's game plan was. Now, I've touched a lot on Arsenal's formation and how Arsenal approached the game. And perhaps we should pay a little bit of attention to what West Ham did, because I think that also plays a massive part in how this kind of story unfolded. So I'm watching that warning sign now, right? So Wan-Bissaka combines really, really well down the right-hand side, comes driving forward, cuts it back to the edge of the penalty area. It's just inside the box. Bowen tries to go back across the goal, and he ends up just dragging it wide of David Raya's right-hand post. That was the warning, though. West Ham United, they set up with what looked like... In fact, let me bring up their team on the screen so I can talk you guys through it as well. West Ham United set up in a different way to what we normally see from Graham Potter's side, to be fair. And there was a clear and specific plan behind that, and there was good reason for it, really. So if you have a look at the way they set up, okay, Alphonse Areola played in goal. Wan-Bissaka and Oliver Scholes were playing as like wing backs. Cresswell, who's a left back by trade, was tucking in at left centre back. Kilman and Todibo were the other two centre backs. And then in the midfield, you had that screen provided by Alvarez, Ward-Prowse and Souček, with Kudus and Bowen in attack. So everybody knows that we tuck our left back in. Everybody knows that that's one of the tactical features of Mikel Arteta's Arsenal side. We try to create overloads in midfield by using fullbacks. We bring them infield. It's more often than not our left back, and we try to sort of swamp people that way. That's the way that we try and do it, okay? We try to suffocate them that way. Everybody knew that that was going to be the case, and everybody knows that that's going to be the case even more so, I think, when someone like Riccardo Calafiori plays, because he is so forward-thinking. Like, at times I question how this guy sort of came through as a defender, not because he's not capable, but because his mindset seems to be so aggressive and so forward-thinking. It's wild to think that he spent such a long time playing as a defender primarily, when all he wants to do, or seems to want to do, is get forward. We had that warning sign with the Wan-Bissaka run down the right-hand side. And again, I'm just going to watch it back again. I want to pay attention to Calafiori's position here, right? Because when the turnover happens, Calafiori's nowhere near it. He's nowhere near it. He's the furthest forward of our left-sided players. And it's Declan Rice that has to go on a gallop all the way back from central midfield into the left-back position to put some pressure on Aaron Wan-Bissaka. But in doing that, and with Thomas Partey caught up the field, we find ourselves in a situation where there are 3 West Ham United players, 3, arriving on the edge of our penalty area. Our midfield can't track them because the one guy in our midfield that has the legs and the ability to cover enough ground to do that has to go out and deal with, or try and deal with, Aaron Wan-Bissaka because our left back's been caught up the pitch. So that was warning sign number 1. I understand the need to be aggressive. I understand the need to be forward thinking when you're trying to break down a block, right? But that was warning sign number 1. And so then to end up conceding the goal that we did just a few minutes later with exactly the same thing happening, literally exactly the same thing. This time, Jarrod Bowen has the ball in a more central area. He plays it out to the right for Aaron Wan-Bissaka. But again, he's got free reign on that right-hand side. This time, Calafiori's actually back, but he never goes to confront him. And so when we're talking about aggression, which we see a lot of from Riccardo Calafiori, why haven't you gone to confront him? Why haven't you gone to try and make a challenge? Why haven't you gone to try harder and stop the cross coming in? Having said that, you've got Rice and Gabriel both at the near post, both caught out. Jarrod Bowen goes in behind. Thomas Partey's in the vicinity as well, and probably should do more in terms of being able to spot that run and doing something about it. But the point I'm trying to make is that we had the warning. When our left back gets caught out of position, West Ham were quite happy to take the leash off of Aaron Wan-Bissaka and say, go flying up that right-hand side. And you know why they could do that? Because they had another 4 defenders. So they could morph into a back 4, even when they had allowed Wan-Bissaka to go forward, which protected them against the transition. Then you think about another element of their team selection, right? Oliver Scholes and Aaron Cresswell, both left backs. Why are you playing 2 left backs? Well, because you want to double up, don't you? You want to double up on Ethan Nwaneri. You want to double up in that space that Martin Odegaard likes to work in. And, Mavropanos was on the bench as well, right? So they had another centre-back available to them, but they decided to go this way for very, very specific reasons, because they felt that was how you nullify this Arsenal attack. Kilman's in there, big physical presence. Todibo's in there, pretty handy in the air as well. And so if Arsenal's only plan and only sort of route of attack in this game is going to be to put the ball into the box for Mikel Merino, no problem. We'll deal with that all day long. Graham Potter set up perfectly, and we needed to adapt and find solutions, and we just didn't do it. We just didn't do it. So those are my thoughts on kind of the goal, how that came about, how we ignored the warning signs, and why that came back to bite us in the backside and was really, really frustrating, I think, to see unfold. Let's move on and talk about a few individuals then, because there's a fair few players that we need to run the rule over on today's episode of the pod. Let's get into that now. Okay, should we start with the captain, Martin Odegaard? Now, let me just be clear, right? I'm not trying to scapegoat individuals on this episode, because I think there are a lot of players actually that you could name as underperformers yesterday. There's a lot of players that didn't do it. There's a lot of players that were out of sorts. And in some cases, like Martin Odegaard, they've been out of sorts for quite some time. And we have struggled to find a way of fixing that, of dealing with it. So let me just run through some of his statistics. Okay, he played all 90 minutes. His XG was 0.08, expected assist 0.22. 89 touches of the ball for Martin Odegaard. 86% pass accuracy rate. It's not the end of the world. I know people will look at that and go, midfielder below 90% passing accuracy. Well, that's not good. I always look at it quite differently. I think if you're playing as one of the more advanced players and your job and your role is to try and find a way through, then actually, if you take a few risks and that sees your passing accuracy rate decrease, I'm okay with that. So I'm not too bothered about that. He played 4 key passes. He put 6 crosses into the box, none of which found their intended target. He played 2 long balls, though, and both of those managed to find their sort of target. Shots on target 0, shots off target 1, 2 blocked shots, 1 dribble attempt, wasn't successful. Only won 2 of his 6 ground duels, wasn't involved in any aerial duels, lost possession 20 times, was fouled twice. And so when you look at all the statistics around Martin Odegaard's performance, they don't make for good reading. They don't. Do I think that some of them are as bad as maybe people would assume, having sort of judged his performance purely on the eye test? No. I think there are elements of his game where he was a little bit more effective statistically than it looked to us that were watching with our eyes rather than through the numbers. But it's been a while now, and it feels like Martin Odegaard has just really dipped in form. And I don't know what exactly I want to put that down to. I think there's a few things, right? So first of all, does he look fit? He doesn't look as fit, and he doesn't look as sharp as he has done previously. It feels like he's still carrying the weight of the injury that he picked up earlier in the season. It feels like he's never really recovered fully from it. And is that a consequence of our schedule and the fact that we just don't have another option to replace him? And so the over-reliance that we've placed on him has created a bit of a burden, and he's struggling under that pressure. I think that's one of the things. I think not having Bukayo Saka to play off of on the right-hand side has been a problem, and not having Ben White to play in tandem with, I think, has also been a problem. I described those three earlier in the season as the kind of holy trinity on Arsenal's right-hand side, because the understanding, the connection is so good. And when you start taking pieces out of that trio and start putting replacements in, whether they're competent players or not, and Jurriën Timber and Ethan Nwaneri certainly are, it's not the same. It's going to take time to develop those relationships. And I don't think those relationships work in the way that Ødegaard connects with White and with Saka. But also, like, it's the indecision with Martin Odegaard right now that I'm really struggling with. Like, it just feels like when he's in and around the penalty area, he takes the extra touch too often. He overthinks situations. He turns into space and then sometimes turns back away from goal. And I don't always feel that that's necessary. I think Martin Odegaard needs to just take the handbrake off a little bit and play a little bit more off the cuff. We always seem to try and work the ball into certain areas. I've noticed the corner of the penalty area is a destination that we quite like to arrive at. And I think we quite like the idea of putting in crosses from that type of angle, because when everybody's fit and available, it's a space that our left winger and left eight can attack. It's not really working at the moment, yet the habit that we've kind of developed is one that dies very, very hard, because we can't seem to shake off trying that over and over again. The overlaps are not very effective. We don't get to the byline anywhere near as often as we used to. And obviously we used to play those cutbacks, and Ødegaard would often be one of the players arriving there. It's not working for him at the moment. And I don't want to be that guy that sticks the boot in on our captain, because I think over the last few years he's been immense, and he's going through a difficult period right now to a certain degree, and to a certain point we got to stick with him. But it's a few things, right? He's out of sorts. I don't think he looks as fit. I don't think he's as confident, and that comes with poor performances. You know, your confidence dips. Confidence is very fragile in football. One week it can be up here, and the next week it can be down there. We all know that. We've all seen that time and time again. The fact that we got no cover for him is a big problem, because we can't take him out of the firing line. You would argue that the one player within our group that has the profile to be a potential Martin Odegaard cover and offer a similar type of creativity is Ethan Nwaneri. But guess what? We got to play him on the right at the moment, because we're without a number of options. There's too much reliance on his creativity, and okay, he's not delivering at the moment, and there should be some scrutiny on him, and there should be some criticism of his performances. I don't deny that for a second. But is this, again, when I talked about it a few weeks ago, we kept talking about collective failure. Is this to do with the squad building? Because we don't have another midfield player within our ranks. And I don't even include Ethan Nwaneri in this, because he's a 17-year-old kid who we should no way be relying on. We don't have another midfield player with a creative bone in their body. Jorginho can start moves from deep, same as Thomas Partey, but Declan Rice ain't that. Mikel Merino ain't that. You know, we really do lack a creative spark within our squad in that midfield area, especially if you take Martin Odegaard out of the equation. And Martin Odegaard is not going to deliver every single week to the incredible high standards that he has set. This season especially, he is struggling. And okay, point the finger at him, absolutely, for sure. But at the same time, what have we done? What do we have to substitute Odegaard's creativity with? Nothing. And so if Odegaard's not on it, we're not on it. And he's not been on it for a long, long time. And that is starting to translate now in terms of the overall performances. He wasn't very good at Leicester for large periods in the game. Did he spark into life a little bit later on? Yeah, he did. But it needs to be more. We need to see more over a longer period of time. We go into the West Ham game again. I was left incredibly frustrated by him because at times it feels like he's going around in circles, being indecisive, passing on the responsibility to others in terms of teeing them up when, in my opinion, as the captain and with someone of that technical ability, he should be taking more on himself, going on more dribbles himself, getting shots off that little bit earlier. Yeah, I'm struggling with Ødegaard at the minute, but while I want to sort of, talk about him on an individual level, I do think you have to think about the collective, and the collective lacks creativity. And people laughed at me in January and last summer when I said, you know what, we're obsessed with the idea of bringing in a striker. And of course we need one. There's no getting away from that. But guess what? We don't have enough creativity in this squad as well. And so a creative midfield player might not be the worst idea in the world, but we didn't do that either. Let's move on anyway from Martin Odegaard, and we're going to talk next up about Declan Rice. Oh, this is a tough one for me to do, the Declan Rice chat, because I don't think I've ever come away from an Arsenal game saying Declan Rice was really bad. I don't think I've ever come away feeling that way. I've felt at times that he's been a little bit off it and not been at the incredibly high level that we know he can be. I felt at the start of the season, he looked a little bit tired. There were a few injuries here and there. And a lot of the time I attributed that down to the summer that he'd had in the Euros. And we saw that affect a lot of players across a number of clubs, right? So it was fair, I think, at that point to sort of just back off of Declan Rice and say, look, he will come good again because we know he's that good of a footballer. Yesterday, it didn't happen for him. And I've seen a lot of suggestions online that West Ham United get in his head, and playing West Ham United is incredibly difficult for him. There was a little moment in the first half where Declan Rice went over to take a corner in front of the away section, and he sort of went over and was receiving a kind of mixed reception from the West Ham United fans. Most of them were giving him stick, but there were a few that were applauding him, and he gave them a sort of very subtle applause back as he went to take the corner. Anyway, after that, it just wasn't the same. And it felt to me like he was getting incredibly frustrated, like his mind was on the fact it was West Ham rather than just focusing on the elements of his performance that he can control. And we got into a situation where you started to look at Declan Rice and started to question whether or not, as that more advanced player, it suits him, And look, for a long, long time, I've looked at Declan Rice and I've tried to figure out whether I think he's a 6 or an 8. And when he plays at 6, I think we have incredible defensive stability because of his mobility and how great an athlete he is. His reading of the game, all of that. I think he's really, really good in the 6, particularly at stopping transitions. And I think that's something he has that Thomas Partey just doesn't anymore. But I think Thomas Partey's passing range is a little bit more advanced, sophisticated, if you like. And for that reason, I quite like Thomas Partey sitting at the 6 because I think it helps us in terms of building up from deep. So I can't settle really on what I think Declan Rice's best position is. I think there are games where Declan Rice as an 8 works perfectly because his athleticism means that he can play as an 8 and a 6 at the same time and give you that little bit extra, both in the defensive phase of the game, but also in the offensive phase. When we're facing a low block, I don't know that Declan Rice has enough guile. And that this is not a slight on him. He's just not that type of player. Like, Does he have those 1-2s in him that maybe Ødegaard and a winger do, or Nwaneri and a winger do? No. And again, it's not a criticism of Declan Rice because I think he's an incredibly effective player. It's more a criticism of how we're utilizing him than anything else. I think it's a position that doesn't necessarily suit his skill set, particularly when you face against low blocks. And when we were 1-0 down and we go into the second half, and it became quite apparent and quite evident that we were going to have to start playing a little bit more of the sort of percentage game, working the ball into the box from wide or whatever. I was looking at Declan Rice and thinking, okay, you've not had the best game, but you know what? You're one of our more forceful players. You're one of our more physical players. You're one of our more determined players. And if we're putting balls into the penalty area and you got Merino there as the kind of standing jumper, the one that the centre-backs are focusing on, but you've got Declan Rice arriving in the box with that pace and physicality that he has, that could work. That could be how we unlock this West Ham United defence. And so when he was taken off, I was perplexed, man. I could not get my head around why that substitution was made. And I was on commentary yesterday and we were discussing it. And when I saw Declan Rice's 41 go up on the board, I was like, who's West Ham's 41? I'm looking at my notes in front of me and I'm trying to figure out who West Ham's number 41 is, because it just didn't compute in my mind that Declan Rice was the one that we were taking off. Did he have a good game? No, not really. Was it one of his worst games? Probably, yes. But at the same time, like, what was the alternative? Like, what was the alternative? Who were you bringing on that was going to give us more than Declan Rice? Declan Rice only needed a moment. Declan Rice only needed to use his athleticism and physical power to get on the end of something, or to unleash one of those ferocious shots that he lets fly and it take a deflection and end up in the back of the net. He, for me, even though he was having a really bad game by his standards, and if I just have a quick look at SofaScore's rating of him, they rate him at 6.9 out of 10. They rate him lowest of our three midfield players. Fine. Even if Declan Rice was having a bad game, I still think he was a really important player to keep on the pitch. And so when I realized that it was him that was coming off, and we were talking about it on commentary, I said to Jimmy Carter, who was doing the game alongside me, I said, Jimmy, surely he's picked up a knock. Surely he's picked up an injury, because to take Declan Rice off now doesn't quite feel right. Has he had the best game? No, but he's always capable of providing and producing that moment, that bit of brilliance. And so, yeah, for me, it didn't make any sense. So I was convinced, my co-commentator said it as well. I was convinced that there was something wrong. There was an issue. Maybe he'd felt something at halftime and he'd mentioned it. And so he was going to give it a little bit longer and see how we got on. I was convinced that there was another issue. So imagine my surprise when, after the game, I asked Mikel Arteta why he took Declan Rice off. And I said, I think a lot of the fans were surprised by that change. Was there another reason for it? Was it injury? Was it fatigue? What was it? And he said, no, it was purely tactical. I was like, what? Purely tactical? Now, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, by the way, because the general consensus appears to be that Declan Rice had a bad game, and he did. But sometimes you got to leave your best players on the pitch because they are capable of providing that one moment and producing that bit of brilliance. Who does he bring on? Alexander Zinchenko at left 8. For such a long time, so many of us have said, why don't we try Zinchenko at left 8? And Mikel Arteta has not wanted to go anywhere near that. He's not wanted to touch it. Yet, in this instance, he does it. He brings him on, and Zinchenko put a couple of pretty crosses into the penalty area. But other than that, he was largely ineffective too. We lost that physical edge that we had in the midfield because we took out our most physical midfield player, and we ended up becoming easier and easier and easier to play through. And the amount of times that West Ham, post Declan Rice going off, were able to play the ball down that inside right channel, our inside left channel, and get it to Kudus nice and early and set off a counter-attack was unbelievable. That doesn't happen as often or as easily for West Ham United if Declan Rice stays on the pitch. So I know people think he had a bad game. I know people think that was what he deserved, to be hooked. For me, no. For me, it was the wrong decision from Mikel Arteta. It is just my opinion. Again, I agree that he didn't have a great game, Declan Rice, so I'm not going to go too big on Mikel Arteta getting this wrong. I'm not going to call it a fatal mistake or anything like that. But I disagree with that change. I don't think that change worked. We weren't any better after it, were we? We weren't any better at all. So, look, the 6 or 8 debate will rumble on, I'm sure, around Declan Rice. But yeah, I still think it was a mistake to take him off yesterday. Unpopular opinion, maybe, but don't really care. That's how I see it. Let's move on then. I want to talk a little bit about Raheem Sterling. Not so much what he did on the pitch, but actually what happened while he was off the pitch and how that might impact him and affect the team as a whole moving forward. Let's get into that next. Don't forget, guys, if you're with us on YouTube, please leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. There are hundreds of you live with us right now. I'd really appreciate it if we could get to, 150 likes by the time the stream ends. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to do that. There's enough of you watching. If you're with us live on X right now, we don't stream every episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast here on X. So I'd encourage you, if you're enjoying the content, to come over to the Chronicles of a Gooner YouTube channel, give it a subscribe, or if you prefer to listen to us in your ears, then you can get involved via Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Likes, reviews, all of that stuff. It really, really does help. But let's talk Raheem Sterling and some of the changes that Mikel Arteta made. Okay, so look, I always felt that leaving Raheem Sterling out of Saturday's game was going to kill his confidence off completely. The tiny little bit of confidence that he has remaining was, in my opinion, wiped away yesterday. And not necessarily because he didn't start. The fact that he didn't start would have impacted him, okay? He would have looked at it and gone, bloody hell, like, we've got 3 fit attackers. I'm one of them and I'm not in the team. What does that say about the manager's faith in me? What does that say about where I'm at currently? But Mikel Arteta, had he communicated it right, and I'm not saying he hasn't because I don't know, but Mikel Arteta with strong communication and the right communication could have justified that point, could have justified the selection by saying to Raheem Sterling, look, mate, Ethan Nwaneri was awesome last weekend. Leandro Trossard's been one of our goal contributors over the last few years. He's established in this side. He's a regular. That left position is his when Martinelli's not around. It's not even up for debate. It's not even up for question. And the Mikel Merino thing, it worked. It worked at Leicester. It got us out of a hole. And so I have to explore that again. I have to go with that. If Mikel Arteta conveyed that message clearly and honestly, I don't think leaving Raheem Sterling out would have killed his confidence in the way that some suggested it might. I don't think that's the case. I think Mikel Arteta had enough evidence to present to justify that decision to Raheem Sterling and keep him on board and keep him engaged. So you leave him out of the starting 11, but he can, as a professional, as someone who's been there, done it, very experienced, who will know full well himself. Like, we sit here talking about his performances every week. Nobody knows that he's ineffective and struggling at the moment more than Raheem Sterling does himself, right? So I'm sure at his age, at this stage in his career, having experienced what he has, he would have understood that being left out of the side, it's not nice when you're one of the only 3 fit forwards. But given what Merino was able to provide us up at Leicester, I can take it. But surely he would have gone into the game thinking, if the point comes where we need to try and change the game and we need a goal, I'm going to be the first one off the bench. I'm going to be the first one that Mikel Arteta turns to. He brought me to this club, partly because, they couldn't get any of their other options in, you feel, but partly because of our existing relationship, because we've worked together before, because he knows exactly what I'm capable of. He would have felt that in that circumstance, he would have been the first to come off the bench, but was he? No. Mikel Arteta opted to bring on 2 fullbacks before he brought on Raheem Sterling. Now, this thing, like, you look at our substitutions yesterday, we brought 3 fullbacks on when we were in need of a goal. That says so much about the options that we have available to us at the moment, right? that's another conversation. Granted, we're up shit street when it comes to, attacking options, and we're having to think outside the box. We're having to try and impact games in different ways. Fine, cool, right. But we needed a goal, and rather than bringing on the only senior forward option that we had on the bench, we opted to bring on 2 fullbacks before him. We took off Riccardo Calafiori and we brought on Miles Lewis-Skelly, and we took off Declan Rice and we brought on Alexander Zinchenko. Now, if Raheem Sterling understood the decision and took it like a man, the decision that he was left out of the starting 11, how would he have been feeling after this? And although I said the other day when we were talking with Mike and we were sort of responding to some of the comments in the chat, you can't be obsessed with Raheem Sterling's feelings, and you have to do what's best and what's right for the team. And I still believe that, by the way. We took it too far, in my opinion, by bringing on a couple of fullbacks before him. That was the final nail in the Raheem Sterling proverbial coffin at Arsenal, if you like, because that was basically saying, you're so bad and you've been so bad and so ineffective that I don't trust you at all. So much so that I'll bring on Alexander Zinchenko in midfield, which I've never done before, not to my memory anyway. And I'll change my left back because that's more likely to get me a goal than you, the seasoned pro forward who's been there, done it, and achieved a lot in the game. Now, in an ideal world, if you have other attacking options available to you, and I don't really include Nathan Butler or Ødegaard as that. I'm not being disrespectful to the young man, but we haven't seen enough to know whether he can actually impact the game. The fact that I've done what I've done as the manager there sends a message that is as clear as day that says to Raheem Sterling, you're not good enough. You're not cutting it. And if we had those alternative options and he was the last of the forward options to come on or the last of the attack-minded players to come on, fine. But we don't have those options. And we're not going to have those options for a good few more weeks. So there needed to be a balance between making the tough decision of leaving Raheem Sterling out because of the circumstances, because he's one of 3 available forwards. That's never going to go down well with him. We had to make that decision, but we had to find the balance between doing that, but also keeping him somewhat engaged because we need him. We don't have many other choices. And what happened yesterday, in my opinion, was the final nail in the proverbial coffin for Raheem Sterling's Arsenal career. It's done. Done. And I don't disagree with that idea of sort of banishing him and sort of casting him aside. Banishing is the wrong word. I don't disagree with the idea of casting him aside because you've seen enough and you're fed up and you're furious and you don't believe that he's ever going to contribute anything really worthwhile. I don't have a problem with that. But under the current circumstances, you needed to be cleverer about it, in my opinion. Now, Mikel Arteta is going to say that he's doing what he thinks was right in the game at that time, and he's got to put the team first. And I agree with that. But I also think to bring on Miles Lewis-Skelly and Alexander Zinchenko, how was that going to turn the game? It wasn't. It wasn't. It was almost as if he was sending a message to Raheem Sterling. And I don't know that I would have done that, given how much we kind of need him at this moment in time. I do want to talk a little bit about Miles Lewis-Skelly's sending off. We'll do that next. Yeah, let's do that next. Okay, so for the 5th time this season, Arsenal were reduced down to 10 men in the Premier League, which, yeah, it's becoming a bit silly now, isn't it? But look, this is probably the first time that I don't really have any complaints about it. Again, in my commentary, as it unfolded in front of me, when the yellow card was shown and I looked at where Miles Lewis-Skelly committed the foul, I thought, can that really be a clear goal scoring opportunity? He's on halfway, still got a lot to do. But then I saw David Raya's position, and David Raya's position dictates that Lewis-Skelly had to be sent off because he's the last man, and the goalkeeper is in no man's land. The goalkeeper's pretty much 5 yards short of the center circle, so it's an open goal. Kudus can either take it on from there or he can dribble. And I don't think anyone's catching him. I know David Raya showed some pace late on in the game, but no one's catching him and he's scoring. So clear goal scoring opportunity, no problem with the red card whatsoever. I guess for me, I've seen a lot of people talking about Miles Lewis-Skelly in the aftermath of this. I've seen some suggestions online that, he needs to mature a little bit, needs to grow up a little bit. This is ill discipline. I don't think this is one that comes from a disciplinary angle. I think this is a kid who is incredibly confident. He's very, very good at what he does. It's very rare that he gets muscled off the ball, or that when he tries to protect it in the way that he tried to in that instance, that he fails. He normally gets it right. He normally uses his body to really, really good effect. Kudus was great physically yesterday in terms of his running power, in terms of his use of his body. I thought he was fantastic. He caused Gabriel a few problems physically as well, and not many are able to do that. I think Miles Lewis-Skelly's mistake here is not that he commits the foul. I think he was right to commit the foul, because if West Ham go and score, the game's done. So you'd rather be 1-0 down and throwing the kitchen sink at it, even with 10, than you would 2-0 down, which I think kills all hope of Arsenal sort of finding some miraculous equalizer and then maybe a winner. I just think his mistake here was that he tried to protect the ball against a player that it was always going to be very difficult to do against, and he didn't quite find the right balance to be able to then hold off the challenge from Mohamed Kudus, and it just all went wrong. Am I going to really sort of bang on about this and drag this one out or speak about it for the weeks to come? No, I think it's the first red card this season that you can have no complaints about. And we've had 5, and 4 of them have been questionable. 4 of them have been questionable. People say he needs to be careful. I don't think so, because he should never have been sent off at Wolves. So if you're holding that one against him, I think you need to kind of just move on from that, to be honest with you. Even the FA came out and said that was wrong, and obviously that has been rescinded, etc., etc. So yeah, no, I'm not worried overall about Miles Lewis-Skelly, but I also don't disagree with that decision yesterday. It was the right decision, and only when I saw David Raya's position was I fully on board with that, and that kind of led me to a position where I just don't have any real complaints about it, to be honest with you. So yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about Mikel Arteta's reaction after the game. If you are with us on YouTube, don't forget to leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and if you're listening on audio, please do leave us a review. All of that wonderful stuff really, really does help. Mikel Arteta seemed to be quite angry after the game, seemed to be quite frustrated, wanted to take the responsibility himself, didn't want to get drawn into the whole, oh, we should have done this and we should have done that in January. He kept saying that there's no excuses. And I kind of agree with him to a point. Like, again, we'll touch on it very, 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 very briefly. Like, should we have done more in January? Yes. No question about it. Is that coming back to bite us in the ass? It certainly appears so. But even with what we had, there was no excuse for that performance. There was no zip. There was no tempo. There was no intensity. Every decision we made was wrong, was bad. There was indecision at times as well, which is really, really frustrating. There was no aggression. The crowd was flat. And, I saw Mikel Arteta on a couple of occasions turn around and try and get the crowd going. And in particular, when the 8 added minutes went up, he turned around, and I think he was a little bit frustrated by the number of people that were heading for the exits, and he started waving his arms and trying to get people going a little bit. And while I think the crowd have a responsibility to support, absolutely, I always say this, did the team give him enough to get behind yesterday? No. And so I don't think you can pin it on the crowd. I don't think that the crowd issue should be made into a big one. Was the crowd a little bit flat? Yes, it was, but it was a result of the flat performance that they were watching on the pitch. Team goes out, performs, shows commitment. Everybody's happy. Everybody gets behind, even when you go a goal down. Team goes out and shows a lack of commitment, a lack of concentration, a lack of intensity. Then people are going to look at it and go, if they're not up for it, how the hell am I going to get up for it? You know what I mean? Yeah. So Arteta, I thought, did the only thing he could do in the press conference, which was talk about how angry he was, how disappointed he was. Make no excuses, because there aren't any excuses for what we saw yesterday, and we got to try and move on from it. But yeah, how much of what we saw yesterday is on him? No, he's not got a lot to work with at the moment, has he? He's literally scraping the barrel for attacking options at the minute. It's a really tough ask. He's trying to think outside of the box. Zinchenko in midfield, changing your fullbacks. He's trying to think outside the box, but it's not enough at the moment because we just don't have the quality in those areas. And a lot of the time, we look at games of football and we analyze them, and we, like to point fingers. We'll say, I don't know. Mikel Arteta did this wrong. He picked the wrong system. Tactically, we didn't do this. Tactically, we didn't do that. We didn't run behind enough. We don't have runners at the minute. We don't have players that can run in behind. And that's as a consequence of the players that we have missing. I would argue we don't have enough of those players in the squad generally. But yesterday, obviously, we didn't have that. It's a hard one for him to process, for him to take. I can't imagine how frustrated he is, because he puts a lot of work in and he clearly wants to win, and he sort of sets up a team, and he's probably spent all week trying to figure out what the best way to approach this is and how to cope with the issues that we have. And then the players go out there and fail to deliver. He's going to be frustrated. He's going to be angry. Also, as the manager, though, the buck does stop with him, and he's taken responsibility for that. No real gripes for me with how Mikel Arteta reacted to the result or the defeat. Would I have done a couple of things differently? With hindsight, yes. But he doesn't have the benefit of hindsight when he makes those decisions. And I think we've got to remember that. Someone said in the chat, where is it? We should have stuck with Emery a little bit longer. Guys, Emery's 11 points behind us, having played a game more. Why is everybody all over Unai Emery? They had a good season last season, got into the Champions League. Have they followed that up this season so far? No. They're in the mix for the top four, of course, but they're by no means the favourites to achieve it. So I don't understand why all the Emery stuff keeps coming out. Come on, it's boring. It really, really is. What I do want to do is take some of your questions for what remains of the show. I will also say, while you get your questions in, pop them in the live chat, put a Q at the beginning. It helps me pick them out from the crowd of comments. I do want to touch on David Raya's sprint. Fantastic. Was he goading Ward-Prowse as well as he sort of ran past him, or was he just having a look over at him? I couldn't quite tell. And then the back heel to get the ball forward for Arsenal. Really good stuff from David Raya. He's quicker than some of our forwards by the looks of it. But yeah, title hopes for me, over, done, dusted. If Liverpool win today as well, you can forget about it. I've got no confidence really that we go to Forest in midweek and we win, because you're expecting much of the same. A side that are going to set up with a low block, even though they're at home, and try and play on the counter-attack. Forest have been happy to give up possession quite a bit this season. It's worked for them, so why would that be any different? But do we have that penetration within our group to be able to break them down? I don't think we do. And that was always the worry. That was always the concern. That was always why people were so frustrated by the lack of business in January, and we are where we are now as a result of that. Let's continue into the chat then. Let's get some of your questions and some of your thoughts before we say our goodbyes. I don't know if you're feeling a little bit better now. I feel like I'm feeling a little bit better having spoken about it. Talking is therapy. Talking is good. Getting your feelings out there, etc., etc. Can we up the likes a little bit, guys? Can we get to at least 100 likes? That would be amazing if we could do that during the live stream. We're about 26, 27 off of that. So if you haven't done so already, please leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Right. Archangel says, watching us now is boring, Harry. I can't deny that. It is. Watching this iteration of Arsenal with the lack of punch in attack, and with the lack of creativity, and with the lack of spark, that is partly as a result of Ødegaard dropping off a little bit, but partly because we don't have an alternative to provide any of that as well. So the buck stops with both, I think, with the squad building, the fact that we don't have another creative player like Martin Odegaard, but also because he as an individual isn't doing it at the moment. I'd say you got to attribute the blame 50-50. But you're right, it's not an entertaining watch at the moment. It's very slow paced, slow tempo, moving the ball from side to side without a great deal of penetration, without a great deal of spark. And it's very hard for me, as much as I love to defend this team, because I really love the players and I love the direction of travel that we've been in generally for such a long time now. I can't defend them against that comment, because I think you're absolutely spot on. What else are you guys saying? Junior Gunner says you didn't read my super chat. I didn't see a super chat, mate, but feel free to repeat it in a normal comment, and I'll make sure I keep an eye out for it. Don23 says Rice should be our number 6, and we should use the Zubimendi money to buy attacking players. There are, of course, suggestions that Arsenal are very close to doing a deal for Martin Zubimendi that will happen in the summer. We will need to regenerate that midfield. We will, because Jorginho or Partey or both could be gone come the summer. So, yeah, there is a need for a midfield signing, but forward positions is where you feel that we need to spend the bulk of the money now. And yeah, let's see how that unfolds. Imran Aline says, Harry, do you believe Arteta will reach... do you believe Arsenal will reach their potential under the Kroenkes? I think there's a ceiling with the Kroenkes in terms of what they're willing to spend. And as a result of that, I think it will be difficult for us to sort of get over the line and then sustain that unless we're prepared to spend like the very biggest spenders in the game. Like, there's a reason that Manchester City have won, 5, 6 of the last 7 titles, because generally speaking, over that period of time and leading up to that, when they were building, they spent more money than anybody else. It's no coincidence that Chelsea had a really successful couple of decades under Roman Abramovich, because they spent pretty much more than anybody else. Now, there are examples of where spending a lot of money gets you nowhere if you spend it badly. Manchester United, the case in point. But it's also not just about spending in terms of transfer fees. It's about wage bills as well. The higher your wage bill, the higher caliber of players you should have in theory. And that's probably where we're still a little bit behind. And, we want to be self-sustaining and all the rest of it. And I understand why, as a businessman, you'd want that for your football club. But I do feel like, especially in January, we had an opportunity to just go, look, let's throw a little bit more at it. I always use this analogy. It might be a stupid analogy, but it makes sense in my head. If you had a budget and you were building a house and you got 90% of the way through it and you run out of budget, what do? Do you just let the house fall apart? Do you not put a roof on it and let it flood, etc., etc.? Or do you find a way of generating those extra funds to get the project over the line? We've come so far that I don't think putting the brakes on it or reversing back is the right thing to do. And it does feel like, when you look at the summer window and then the January window, that we've done exactly that. We've kind of just eased off on the spending and put our foot on the brakes a little bit. Maybe there's reasons, FFP, UEFA regulations, that we've had to do that. But I think if we were creative enough, we could have found ways to just provide ourselves with that bit of wiggle room so that we could then go and do what we needed to do in the window. So, yeah. Chris says, do you think Saliba may be swayed into going to Real Madrid come the summer? Wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. To be fair, he's been really poor recently. His performances have dropped off massively. And so, no, I don't think he'll be off to Real Madrid unless he can improve. And if he improves, that's a good thing for us, I guess, in the interim. Let's see. Wandering Minstrel says it's like we're on life support. Yeah, it does feel like that at the minute when you look at the performances. Not much energy, not much life. Yeah, it does feel like we were holding on in this title race, and I think we've finally fallen off. Junior Gunner says, what's more likely? Do you reckon we win the league or get past Atletico or Real Madrid if we get through PSV? In my opinion, we have a snowball's chance in both. Can I sit here today and say that I'm confident that we're going to be successful in either of those two competitions now? And successful means winning them. No, I can't. I can't. This is going to piss people off, but I'm going to say it anyway. If we did make the Champions League semi, though, for instance, and we finish second, it wouldn't be the disaster season that it feels like it's shaping up to be. But if we fall off of second, if someone can close the gap on us, if we don't make progress in the Champions League as well, then I think we'll have every right to look back at this season with huge regret. Will I factor the injuries into my assessment? Will I factor in a lot of the things that were outside of our control? Absolutely, I bloody would. But yeah, let's just see what happens. I don't want to be too downbeat. I don't want to overreact to stuff before it happens. I hate that mentality and that attitude. So I'd be a hypocrite if I sat here doing it now. Wandering Minstrel says, don't you feel we have been that one signing away on more than one occasion? Yeah. And that's where I start to question the football club and not the manager. Like, nobody's going to convince me that Mikel Arteta didn't want a forward in January. He absolutely did. He said it himself 100 times. He wouldn't have said it if he didn't want it. Okay, why would you put your head above the parapet and put that out into the world if you don't really truly believe that? It was almost as if he was saying, Arsenal, please get me a forward, and they didn't do it. They failed to do it. They would argue that the right option wasn't available. Did it need to be the perfect option? Did it need to be the guy that was going to lead your line for the next 10 years? Or did it just need, we kept hearing it shouldn't just be a body. We needed a body. We need a body now. We needed a different striking option yesterday, and we didn't bloody have one. So, yeah, it does feel like we've been one signing away on more than one occasion. And that goes back further than just the Mikel Arteta days as well, by the way. And that's why, again, I'm looking at the football club more than I'm looking at the manager at this stage. Do I agree with every decision he's made? No. Do I agree with some of the sort of tactical things he's done recently? Do I agree with the way that our team are playing in terms of how possession seems to be a massive focus, and then we seem to dress up when we fail to be efficient by the fact that we had a lot of the ball and we had a high volume of shots, even though none of them were barely on target, none of them worked the goalkeeper, etc., etc. Do I have a problem with some of that stuff? Yes, I do. But ultimately, I think I'm still in a place where I'm not ready to go after Mikel Arteta and say he's the problem, because I think he's made it abundantly clear what he wants, what he needs. Mikel Arteta, Super Mikel Arteta, he knows exactly what he needs. That's how the song goes. I think he does know exactly what he needs. Has he been given exactly what he needs? I think he's been given a lot in the past, but I think in the last 12 months, that investment, that support for him in terms of spend has slowed down. Did it need to happen from a financial perspective? Maybe. But without that being clear, and it's not clear because the financial results look pretty good, it's not clear. It's hard for me to say that they were right not to give him what he needed, especially with the injuries. It was almost as though, and it might be indirectly, and it might have been unintentional, but the message that a lack of business sent, especially in January, was this season's been crap. We've had a lot of injuries. Everything's gone our way. Let's throw the towel in on it and start looking ahead to next season. And I don't think to be an elite football club, you can ever take that stance and you can ever write off a season. And again, they'll deny that that's what they did, and that's fine. Again, I don't even know. I can't say it was intentional, but that's the message that it sent to a lot of fans. That's why fans are frustrated. That's why fans are disappointed. And yeah, I guess we are where we are. Well, I didn't mean to press that, but there's a little sting for you. Right, I'm going to love you and leave you guys. Thank you so much. I'm now going to go to the cinema and sit through a kids' film for an hour and a half. For God's sake, what have I done? What have I signed up to? Don't forget to leave a like on the YouTube video if you're with us on that particular platform. If you're listening to us on audio, please do leave us a review, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, etc., etc. However you prefer. I feel a little bit better. I feel like I've got a lot off my chest this morning. I hope you guys enjoyed the pod too. And I will see you all on Monday with more. We might drop a few clips from today's pod onto the channel. So if you do see those come up, at least click into them. Let them run for a bit so that I get the watch time. Like them. Leave a comment so that we get the interaction on the video. All of that stuff really, really does help. I know it's annoying, but that's all the kind of algorithmic stuff that really does work on YouTube. So thank you. Archangel says better watch a kids film than us. I'm going to watch Dogman if anybody's seen it. Yeah, I've got no idea what it's about. I got no idea. Yeah, I got no idea what it's going to be like. But hey, yeah, got to spend some time with the kids, and yeah, that's what they want to do. So I'll see you all very, very soon on the next one. Until then, take care of yourselves and all the best. Goodbye.